Dr. Robert Redfield. Doctor, great to have you with us today.
Thanks, Mark. Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
So, like I said, looking back, and you and I have spoken many times about this, and you went out on a limb and you said, I do believe that this was a virus that was supercharged because it was man-made in a lab. What do you make now of these findings? And people say, why is the Department of Energy looking into this? But it's actually a very specialized division of the Department of Energy at the Lawrence Livermore National Lab. These people are experts in bioweapons, germ warfare. So what do you think it is that changed their thinking on this?
Well, I think it's of note that both the FBI and now the Department of Energy have come to the conclusion that they believe this virus came from the Wuhan lab. And what's important about their workforce is they have an enormous, powerful scientific workforce. And I think they really did approach this in an aggressive scientific way. Maybe some of the other intelligence agencies don't really have the depth, as you mentioned, Livermore. But Energy has a lot of science depth, and I think they really looked at this scientifically. FEI obviously has a lot of science depth. They looked at it scientifically. Obviously, the information in the Energy report is still classified, but I do believe, as I said before, over 2 years ago, that I think that clearly the origin of this virus was a leak from the Wuhan lab, and eventually that will, people will come to realize that.
Yeah, as you say, they haven't told us what changed their mind, but obviously that's the most intriguing question. What did they come across that makes them make this very important proclamation now, even at low confidence or moderate confidence, as the FBI said?
Yeah, I don't know exactly, but I will say a couple things quickly that scientifically, I think the argument that Fauci and Collins and others have made that this was from nature because it was like SARS and like MERS is misleading, because both SARS and MERS, when they came from a bat into an intermediate host and then into man, never learned how to go man to man. In the first epidemic of SARS and MERS, it was less than 1,000 cases. And we sit here today, 18 years later, it's less than 10,000 cases. COVID came from into man and immediately was enormously transmissible, which in my view meant that it was educated in a laboratory how to infect human tissue. And we know there's a publication from 2014 from that laboratory saying they succeeded in taking bat coronaviruses to bind to a key human receptor, the H2 receptor. And so I find it really upsetting to me scientifically when good scientists get up and say, hey, it has to be a spillover event from nature because that's like COVID and that's like SARS and that's like MERS. And in fact, it's nothing like SARS and MERS. Yeah. It's nothing like that at all. This is extremely unique and I think really does show, and that doesn't even get into the nuances of the virus and the furin cleavage site and a lot of the other speculation.
Exactly.
So I think these scientists finally really went and looked at the science and said, the science doesn't add up that this came out of nature.
Yeah, well, we were told that they were looking at the science all along. We were told to shut up and not say that it came from anything, that it might have come from the lab. That was laughed at. It was scoffed at. The other thing that was scoffed at, Dr. Redfield, and I'm going to let you go after this question, but first of all, I want to point out that Dr. Peter Daszak and Lancet, they all came out and shut down the lab leak theory, and they shut it down hard in the early months of all of this. And they were involved in funding some gain-of-function research in a lab here in the U.S. and there. They can argue about how circuitous that route of funding may or may not have been and how close they were to it. But we do know that they came down and shut that down. I want to ask you a question before I let you go about Lancet now recognizing that natural immunity, once you get COVID, that is stronger than 2 vaccines. Because here's another thing that if you said to people, well, I had a vaccine and then I had COVID, so, laugh to you. What does that even mean, right? Now we know that it means quite a lot, right?
Yeah, Martha, it means a great deal. It always did, and it always disappointed me and upset me that people didn't give credibility to natural immunity. We know it for every pathogen, that the best form of immunity you can get is from being infected with the pathogen. The problem with natural immunity is it's non-durable, but that's the same with the vaccine. The vaccine's non-durable either. And so it really was inappropriate, misguided to have policies that mandated people to get vaccine even though they may have evidence of natural immunity from infection. So I think we should lay this to rest, that natural immunity is as powerful, or as does the article in Lancet suggest, even more powerful than a two-shot vaccination series. And,
well, you know what, it
so
seems
it's just, again, it's...
apologies are due to you. They're due to Tom Cotton. There are a lot of reporters who also should apologize for some of what they said throughout this process. This is very serious evaluations of what was going on. It impacted people's lives. It impacted education, the economy, everything. So I hope that some of those retractions and corrections are forthcoming. And you certainly were right for a very long time. Dr. Redfield, thank you so much.
Well,
it's always good to have you with us. Go ahead.
I appreciate it. I said the hardest thing for me, since I live in Baltimore with all my grandkids, was the Baltimore Sun having all their first page stories saying that I was a racist because I suggested this came from an Asian lab. You know, very disappointing how people want to name call and not just have an honest scientific discussion about the possible origins of this pathogen. But I do think we're going to get there. You know, unfortunately, I wish they would release the classified information so everyone can see it. I suspect they won't, because I suspect a lot of it's related to methods and how they gathered the information. But it should let people know that very smart people now at the Energy Department have come to this conclusion, along with the FBI.
Well, Dr. Redfield, I'm sure your grandchildren know the man you are, and we're grateful to have you with us, as always, sir. Thank you very much for being here today.